The blood-red sun painted the Montana Territory sky as Amanda Garrett ran for her life, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. Her once pristine blue calico dress was torn at the hem, dirt stained from her desperate flight through the wilderness. It was 1878, and she had finally gathered the courage to leave the man who called himself her husband, a man whose fists spoke more often than his words. Amanda stumbled over a rock, catching herself before falling. The distant sound of hoofbeats sent terror coursing through her veins. Frank had found her trail. She knew he would. He'd been a tracker during the war, and even in the vastness of the territory, he could find a needle in a haystack if he set his mind to it. She quickened her pace, the small bundle of belongings clutched tightly to her chest. The town of Silverdale was still miles away, and her legs already felt like lead. Her lungs burned from the exertion, but the memory of Frank's last beating fueled her determination. The purple bruises on her arms and ribs were still fresh, hidden beneath her dress like shameful secrets. The distant sound of rushing water gave her hope. If she could reach the river, perhaps she could throw him off her trail, even if just for a little while. The hoofbeats grew louder, and Amanda ducked behind a cluster of pine trees, pressing her body against the rough bark, willing herself invisible. The rider approached, his horse moving at a steady trot. Amanda held her breath, pressing a hand over her mouth to stifle any sound. But instead of Frank's massive bay stallion, a lean palomino emerged from around the bend. The man atop it wasn't Frank, but a stranger tall and lean, with a weather-beaten hat pulled low over his eyes. The rider reined in his horse, scanning the terrain with a practiced eye. His gaze settled on her hiding spot, and Amanda knew she'd been discovered. Her heart sank. What if this man knew Frank? What if they were friends? "Madam," his voice was deep but gentle, not at all what she expected. "You all right there?" Amanda remained frozen, uncertainty warring with desperation. The stranger dismounted with fluid grace, keeping his distance as if sensing her fear. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, raising his hand slightly. "Name's Kyle Irwin. I'm just passing through these parts." Something in his steady gaze gave Amanda courage. "I need to get to Silverdale," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, there's a man following me." Kyle's expression remained neutral, but his eyes, a clear, piercing blue, hardened slightly. "Your husband?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Amanda nodded, stepping out from her hiding place. "He'll kill me for leaving," she said, her voice breaking on the words. The cowboy's hand moved imperceptibly closer to the revolver on his hip. "Then he'll face a better shot first," he answered, his voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of steel that sent a different kind of shiver through her. Kyle Irwin had been riding the trails between Montana and Wyoming for 5 years since returning from the war. He'd seen his share of violence and misery, but the sight of the bruised woman before him stirred something protective he'd thought long buried. "My horse can carry us both to town," he said, adjusting his hat. "We'd make better time than on foot." Amanda hesitated, eyeing the large animal warily. "I've never been on a horse before," she admitted. A ghost of a smile touched Kyle's lips. "Paladin here is gentle as they come. I'll make sure you don't fall." After a moment's hesitation, Amanda nodded. Time was of the essence, and her aching feet wouldn't carry her much further. Kyle helped her onto the saddle with respectful hands, then mounted behind her, keeping a proper distance while still ensuring she was secure. "Hold onto the horn," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. His presence was solid and reassuring at her back, but not imposing. It was the first time in years a man's proximity hadn't filled her with dread. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic movement of the horse lulling Amanda into a strange calm despite the circumstances. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when Kyle finally spoke again. "Silverdale's got a decent sheriff, name's Thompson. He's fair-minded, doesn't take kindly to men who raise their hands to women." Amanda's shoulders tensed. "It won't matter, Frank has friends everywhere. He supplies horses to half the territory. People look the other way." Kyle was quiet for a moment. "Then perhaps Silverdale isn't far enough," he said finally. "I'm headed to Whitefish, small place up north, newer settlement, good folks. Man could get lost there or found, depending on what he's looking for." I don't know anyone there, Amanda said, uncertainty creeping into her voice. You know me, Kyle replied simply. Not that I'm much, but I can help you get settled, find work. Town's growing, needs all sorts of hands. Amanda twisted slightly to look at him. Why would you help a stranger? Kyle's gaze remained on the trail ahead. War taught me there's enough cruelty in this world without adding to it. Besides, his voice softened, my sister was married to a man like your Frank. She didn't make it out. The pain in those few words told a story deeper than any lengthy explanation could have. Amanda turned back around, processing his words. I'm sorry about your sister. So am I, he said. Every day. The sound of galloping hooves in the distance made them both stiffen. Kyle guided Paladin off the main trail into a dense copse of trees. That'll be Frank, Amanda whispered, terror evident in her voice. He always rides like the devil's at his heels. Kyle dismounted swiftly, helping Amanda down. Stay here with Paladin, keep low. Before she could protest, he moved through the trees with the silent precision of a man accustomed to navigating danger. Amanda pressed herself against Paladin's warm flank, finding strange comfort in the animal's steady breathing. Through the trees, she could see Kyle position himself behind a large boulder, hand resting casually on his holster, but not drawing his weapon. The approaching rider came into view. Frank Garrett, his massive frame hunched forward in the saddle, his face contorted with rage as he scanned the surroundings. Frank reined in his horse, so close that Amanda could see the sweat beading on his ruddy face. She held her breath, praying Paladin wouldn't make a sound. Looking for something? Kyle's voice carried clearly through the still air as he stepped into view, positioning himself in the middle of the trail. Frank's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. Mind your business, stranger. I'm looking for my wife. She wandered off, confused like, not right in the head. Kyle's posture remained relaxed, but Amanda recognized the alertness in his stance. Strange, only person I've seen today was a lady headed to Silverdale, seemed perfectly clear-headed to me. Said something about catching the stage east. Frank's hand moved toward his gun. You're lying, she can't have gotten that far on foot. Kyle didn't flinch. I didn't say she was on foot. The implication hung in the air between them. Frank's face darkened. You helping my wife run from me. That's a dangerous game, mister. Not as dangerous as beating a woman, Kyle replied, his voice deceptively mild. Seems to me a man who do that might be the one not right in the head. Frank drew his gun, but Kyle was faster, much faster. Before Frank could level his weapon, Kyle's revolver was out and steady, aimed directly at Frank's chest. I wouldn't, Kyle said quietly. I've seen enough killing to last several lifetimes. Don't make me add to the count. Frank froze, his expression a mixture of rage and calculation. After a tense moment, he slowly holstered his weapon. This ain't over, he growled. That woman is my property by law. No human being is property, Kyle replied, his gun still trained on Frank. Not anymore. Now turn that horse around and ride back the way you came. The lady's made her choice. Frank spat on the ground. You don't know who you're dealing with, cowboy. Neither do you, Kyle replied evenly. Now ride. With a final venomous glare, Frank wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward town. Kyle remained still until the sound of hoofbeats faded, then returned to Amanda, holstering his weapon. He'll be back, Amanda said, trembling with the aftermath of fear. With men, Kyle nodded, helping her back onto Paladin, which is why we're not going to Silverdale. We'll cut north through the high country. I know these mountains better than most. He mounted behind her. If you're still set on heading east, I can get you to the Northern Pacific line in a week or so. Amanda was quiet for a long moment. I don't have anywhere specific to go, just away from him. Then Whitefish is as good a destination as any, Kyle said. Town's far enough off the beaten path that men like Frank rarely find their way there. They rode until dusk, following game trails that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. When it became too dark to safely continue, Kyle found a sheltered hollow near a small stream. We'll rest here, he said, dismounting and helping Amanda down, her legs nearly buckled after the hours in the saddle. Kyle caught her elbow to steady her, releasing it immediately once she found her footing. First day's always the hardest. You'll get your riding legs soon enough. Amanda watched as he efficiently set up a small camp, gathering wood for a fire with practiced ease. "Won't the smoke give us away?" she asked nervously. Kyle shook his head. "We're well off any regular trail, and I'll keep it small. Cold night coming need the warmth more than we need to worry about being spotted." Once the fire was crackling softly, Kyle pulled provisions from his saddlebags: jerky, hardtack, and a handful of dried berries. He offered her the best portions, which Amanda accepted gratefully, suddenly aware of her gnawing hunger. "Thank you," she said after they had eaten in companionable silence. "Not just for the food, but for—" She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the enormity of what he had done for her. Kyle nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Get some rest, Mrs. Garrett. Long ride ahead tomorrow." "Amanda," she said softly. "Please call me Amanda." A small smile touched his lips. "Amanda, then. I'll take first watch." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Amanda. She lay wrapped in the blanket Kyle had given her, watching him through half-closed eyes as he sat by the fire, occasionally adding small sticks to keep it alive. In the flickering light, she could see the strong lines of his profile, the slight furrow between his brows as he stared into the flames, lost in thought. 5 years had passed since Kyle had allowed himself to care about another person's fate. After the war and his sister's death, he'd ridden the trails alone, taking work where he could find it: cattle drives, ranch hands, the occasional bounty hunting when money was scarce. He'd built walls around himself, high and impenetrable. Yet something about Amanda Garrett's quiet courage had breached those defenses. The way she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances, the resilience that had driven her to flee rather than endure more abuse, it stirred something in him he'd thought long dead. He glanced at her sleeping form. She deserved better than the hand life had dealt her. If he could help her find safety, perhaps it would balance some of the scales he carried in his soul. Dawn broke with a pale, watery light that promised rain. Kyle had let Amanda sleep through the night, keeping vigil by the dying fire. He'd spent the hours planning their route, calculating distances and potential dangers. Frank Garrett wouldn't give up easily. Men like him never did. Their best chance was speed and stealth, using the terrain to their advantage. Amanda woke as Kyle was saddling Paladin. She rose stiffly, wincing at the soreness in her muscles from the previous day's ride. "There's coffee," Kyle said, nodding toward a small tin cup near the remnants of the fire. "Not much, but it's hot." Amanda accepted the cup gratefully, savoring the bitter warmth. "You didn't wake me for my watch," she observed. Kyle shrugged. "Figured you needed the rest more than I needed sleep." After a quick breakfast of the remaining jerky, they set out again, winding their way through increasingly mountainous terrain. The threatened rain arrived mid-morning, a steady drizzle that soon soaked through their clothes. Kyle pulled a worn slicker from his saddlebags, draping it around Amanda's shoulders despite her protests. "You'll catch your death," she argued, trying to hand it back. "Weathered worse," he replied simply, guiding Paladin around a treacherous section of path. They rode in silence for miles, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Paladin's hooves and the soft patter of rain on leaves. By mid-afternoon, the rain had stopped, and patches of blue sky began to appear between the clouds. "There's a trapper's cabin about 2 miles ahead," Kyle said as they forded a shallow stream. "Friend of mine uses it during fur season. Should be empty this time of year. We can dry out there, give Paladin a proper rest." Amanda nodded, too exhausted and saddle sore to argue. The prospect of 4 walls and a roof, however rustic, sounded like heaven. The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a one-room structure of rough-hewn logs, but to Amanda, it seemed as welcoming as a palace. Kyle helped her dismount, then sought a Paladin, unsaddling him and turning him into a small corral attached to the cabin. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished: a crude table, 2 stools, a cast-iron stove, and a narrow cot pushed against one wall. Kyle busied himself starting a fire in the stove, while Amanda stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly acutely aware of their situation. "You take the cot," Kyle said, seeming to sense her discomfort. "I'll bunk by the stove." "I can't take your friend's bed," she protested. Kyle's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Jeremiah wouldn't mind. Besides, it's not like he's using it. As evening fell, the cabin grew warm and dry. Kyle had found a cache of supplies, beans, coffee, even a small sack of flour hidden under a loose floorboard. Jeremiah's emergency stock, he explained as he prepared a simple meal. I'll replace it next time I'm through. The hot food and shelter worked wonders on Amanda's spirits. As they ate, she found herself studying Kyle when he wasn't looking the way his hands, rough and calloused, handled things with unexpected gentleness. The quiet competence with which he moved, the way his eyes seemed to hold stories he never told. How do you know this, Jeremiah? She asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Kyle set down his tin plate. Saved his life during a blizzard some years back, found him half frozen in a drift, got him to shelter just in time. He shrugged as if it were nothing remarkable. He's done the same for me a time or two. Kind of understanding we have. You have many friends scattered about like that? Amanda asked, genuinely curious. A few, Kyle admitted. Not many I'd call friends exactly, more like people who know I'll keep my word and I know the same of them. Amanda nodded, understanding. Frank had many he called friends. Most were just afraid of him or wanted something from him. Kyle studied her across the small table. How did you come to marry a man like that? Amanda's gaze dropped to her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. I was 17, naive. My father died, leaving my mother and me with debts. Frank seemed charming, successful, promised to take care of everything. A bitter smile touched her lips. He did in his way, paid the debts, buried my mother when fever took her that winter. Then showed his true nature once there was no one left to protect me. 5 years you endured that, Kyle said softly, not a question but a recognition of her strength. Amanda nodded. At first I thought I deserved it somehow, then I thought it would get better. Eventually I realized neither was true, but by then I was afraid to leave, until... Her hand unconsciously went to her midsection. Kyle's sharp eyes caught the gesture. You're with child, he stated quietly. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. 3 months along. When I realized, I knew I had to go. I couldn't let a child be raised with such a father. Kyle was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, all the more reason to get you safely to Whitefish. Town has a decent doctor. Mrs. Wilson runs a boarding house for women. She's good people, will help you get settled. And you? Amanda asked, meeting his gaze directly. What will you do once we reach Whitefish? Kyle looked away. I usually winter there, do odd jobs, repairs at the sawmill. Come spring, I'll likely move on, always do. Something like disappointment flickered across Amanda's face, but she quickly masked it. Of course, you've already done more than enough. Kyle stood abruptly. Should check on Paladin, make sure he's settled for the night. He paused at the door. Get some rest, we leave at first light. Outside, the night air was crisp and clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Kyle leaned against the corral fence, absently stroking Paladin's nose as the horse nuzzled his pocket for treats. Nothing there for you, old friend, he murmured. Used up the last sugar cube 2 days ago. His thoughts turned to Amanda, to the quiet dignity with which she carried herself despite everything. The news of her pregnancy complicated matters. A woman alone with a child would face countless hardships, even in a place as relatively accepting as Whitefish. He'd meant what he said, he always moved on. 5 years of drifting had become a habit, a shield against forming attachments that could lead to loss. Yet something about Amanda made him wonder what it might be like to stay, to build something lasting. Kyle shook his head, dismissing the thought. One step at a time, get her safely to Whitefish first. The rest would sort itself out. When he returned to the cabin, Amanda was already asleep on the cot, her face peaceful in repose. Kyle added wood to the stove, then spread his bedroll on the floor nearby. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of paths not taken and possibilities he'd long ago abandoned. They rose before dawn, sharing a quick breakfast of leftover beans and coffee. Amanda seemed more rested, some color returning to her pale cheeks. As they prepared to leave, Kyle noticed her gazing at the cabin with an almost wistful expression. Something on your mind? He asked as he saddled Paladin. Amanda turned to him with a small smile. Just thinking how peaceful it is here, hidden away from the world. Kyle nodded, understanding what she didn't say. Safe. Yes, she agreed softly. Safe. They rode out as the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern mountains, casting long shadows through the pine forest. Kyle set a steady pace, mindful of Amanda's condition and Paladin's endurance. They were still 3 days from Whitefish, assuming good weather and no complications. Around midday, they emerged from the forest onto a high ridge overlooking a vast valley. In the distance, a thin plume of smoke rose from what appeared to be a small settlement. Trout Creek, Kyle explained, pointing, small mining town. Not a place we want to visit, rough folk, and too many travelers passing through who might carry word back to your husband. Amanda nodded, but her attention was caught by something else, a cloud of dust on the valley floor moving in their direction. Kyle, she said, pointing. Riders. Kyle's expression darkened as he studied the approaching group. 6, maybe 7 men, moving fast. He turned Paladin away from the ridge. Could be nothing, but let's not take chances. They descended the ridge on its northern side, entering a labyrinth of narrow canyons and draws that Kyle navigated with confident familiarity. The terrain slowed their progress, but would make them nearly impossible to track. How would Frank know to look for us here? Amanda asked as they picked their way through a rocky stream bed. We're miles from where you confronted him. He wouldn't, Kyle replied grimly, unless he knew where to start looking. Someone who knows these mountains knows the routes north. He glanced at her. You said he has friends everywhere. Fear crept back into Amanda's eyes. What do we do? Change plans, Kyle said decisively. There's an old mining trail east of here, leads to a place called Eagle's Rest. Friend of mine, Jeremiah's sister, actually runs the general store there. We can rest up, maybe find another horse. 2 riders move faster than 1 horse carrying double. The detour added miles to their journey, but Kyle's instincts told him it was necessary. They camped that night in a shallow cave, foregoing a fire despite the chill in the air. Kyle kept his revolver close, taking turns with Amanda to watch while the other slept. During her watch, Amanda found herself studying Kyle's sleeping face. In repose, the hard lines around his mouth softened, making him appear younger. What kind of life had he led, this solitary man who'd risked himself for a stranger? She wondered about the sister he'd mentioned, the one who hadn't escaped her abusive husband. The pain in his voice when he'd spoken of her had been raw, even after what must have been years. Dawn brought a heavy mist that clung to the mountainsides, obscuring visibility but providing excellent cover. They made good time along the mining trail, which, though neglected, was still passable. By late afternoon, the small settlement of Eagle's Rest came into view, a cluster of weathered buildings nestled in a protected valley. Not much to look at, Kyle commented as they approached, but Sarah Parker runs a clean store and doesn't ask questions. Her late husband was a prospector. Left her the claim and store when fever took him 3 years back. The general store stood at the center of the settlement, a 2-story building with living quarters above the shop. Kyle helped Amanda dismount, then tied Paladin to the hitching post outside. A bell jingled as they entered the store. A woman looked up from behind the counter, slender, with graying auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her stern expression softened when she recognized Kyle. Well, if it isn't the wandering cowboy, she said, a smile warming her weathered face. Jeremiah said you might be passing through these parts. Sarah, Kyle greeted her with a respectful nod. This is Amanda. We're hoping to rest here a day or 2 before continuing north. Sarah's gaze shifted to Amanda, taking in her travel-worn appearance and the protective way Kyle positioned himself slightly in front of her. Understanding flickered in the older woman's eyes. Any friend of Kyle's is welcome here, she said simply. Got a room upstairs you can use. Just cleaned it yesterday, as luck would have it. Relief washed over Amanda. Thank you, Mrs. Parker. We don't want to impose. Sarah, please, the woman interrupted with a dismissive wave. And it's no imposition. Been too quiet around here since my boy left for California. She turned to Kyle. You'll want to stable that horse out back. Joseph at the livery died last winter, but I keep the place running for the occasional traveler. Kyle nodded his thanks. One more thing, Sarah. We might have trouble following us. Man named Frank Garrett and some hired guns. If they come asking, "Never heard of you," Sarah finished for him, her expression hardening. "Never saw a soul matching your description." Kyle's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Knew we could count on you," Sarah snorted. "Go see to your horse, I'll show the young lady up to the room. Stew's on the stove when you're done." The room above the store was small but clean, with a brass bed, washstand, and rocking chair by the window. Sarah provided fresh water and towels, then left Amanda to wash away the dust of their journey while she prepared supper. The hot meal and safe shelter worked wonders for both travelers' spirits. After they'd eaten their fill of Sarah's venison stew and sourdough bread, they sat around the kitchen table, cups of coffee warming their hands. "So," Sarah said, eyeing Amanda shrewdly, "when's the baby due?" Amanda nearly choked on her coffee. "How did you raise 5 children of my own?" Sarah replied with a shrug. "Know the signs. Besides, explains why Kyle's running himself ragged to get you north." She glanced at Kyle. "Whitefish?" Kyle nodded. "Safest place I know for someone starting fresh." Sarah considered this. True enough, though it's still a hard journey from here, especially for a woman in her condition. She turned to Amanda. "You're welcome to stay here until after the birth, if you'd prefer. Town's small, but we've got a decent midwife." Amanda's eyes widened at the unexpected offer. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose nonsense," Sarah cut in. "Store needs help anyway. My eyes aren't what they used to be for keeping the books." She rose, gathering their empty dishes. "Sleep on it, no need to decide tonight." After Sarah retired to her own room, Kyle and Amanda sat in comfortable silence, the events of the day catching up with them. Finally, Amanda spoke. "She's very kind," she said softly. "You have good friends for a man who claims not to have many." Kyle's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Sarah's good people, known her family for years." "Do you think we should consider her offer?" Amanda asked hesitantly. "About staying here until the baby comes," Kyle studied the bottom of his coffee cup as if it held answers. "Might be wise. Trail to Whitefish is rough in parts. Winter comes early in these mountains." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "But it's your decision, Amanda. Your life, your child." The way he said it, giving her complete agency over her own fate, nearly brought tears to her eyes. How long had it been since anyone had respected her enough to let her choose for herself? "What would you do?" she asked. "If you were to stay, I mean." Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "Plenty of work to be had around here. Hunting, trapping, helping at the sawmill when they need an extra hand." He shrugged. "Same as I do in Whitefish, I suppose." "But you'd eventually move on," Amanda said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. Kyle looked at her, something unreadable in his blue eyes. "Maybe, maybe not. Depends on what reasons a man might have to stay." The words hung between them, full of possibilities neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Amanda's heart beat a little faster, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. "I'll think about Sarah's offer," she said finally. "It's a big decision," Kyle nodded, rising from the table. "I'll sleep in the stable with Paladin. Keep an eye on the road in case we have visitors." "You don't have to," Amanda began. "Better safe than sorry," Kyle interrupted gently. "Get some rest. Morning comes early around here." After he left, Amanda sat alone in the kitchen for a long while, considering her options. Eagle's Rest was smaller than Whitefish, more isolated, but perhaps that was an advantage. Frank would be less likely to look for her here. And Sarah's kindness offered a safe harbor until the baby came. But what of Kyle? Would he truly stay? Or would he drift away as he'd done for years, leaving her to build a new life alone? The thought brought an unexpected pang. In their short time together, she'd come to rely on his steady presence, his quiet strength. With a sigh, Amanda rose and made her way upstairs. Tomorrow would bring clearer thinking, she hoped. For now, sleep beckoned irresistibly. Morning arrived with a clatter of hooves on the hard-packed dirt of Eagle's Rest's single street. Amanda was helping Sarah inventory dry goods when Kyle burst through the store's door, his expression grim. "Riders coming," he said without preamble. 6 men heavily armed, one matches Frank's description. Sarah moved with surprising speed for a woman of her years, locking the store's front door and pulling down the blinds. "Back way," she said, gesturing toward a door behind the counter. "Through the storeroom. There's a trail leads up to the old mining camp. Cabin there still has a good roof." Amanda's heart raced with renewed fear. How did they find us? Doesn't matter, Kyle said, checking his revolver. We need to move, now. Sarah pressed a small bundle into Amanda's hands. Food and blankets. Go with Kyle, I'll handle these men. Sarah, Kyle began, concern evident in his voice. Don't you worry about me, Kyle Irwin, the older woman cut him off. No one threatens guests under my roof. Besides, she added with a grim smile, Joseph's old shotgun still works just fine. The sounds of horses stopping outside the store spurred them into action. Kyle led Amanda through the storeroom to a narrow door that opened onto a back alley. Paladin was already waiting, saddled and ready, tethered to a post. Sarah thinks of everything, Kyle muttered as he helped Amanda mount, then swung up behind her. They set off at a trot toward a steep trail that wound up the mountainside behind the settlement. Behind them, they heard raised voices, then the distinctive boom of a shotgun. Amanda gasped, twisting to look back. Sarah is tougher than she looks, Kyle assured her, though his jaw was tight with worry. Warning shot, most likely. She knows how to handle herself. They rode hard for an hour, climbing steadily through pine forest until they reached a small plateau. The remains of a mining camp sprawled before them, collapsed sluice boxes, rusted equipment, and several cabins in varying states of disrepair. Kyle guided Paladin to the largest structure, which looked somewhat more maintained than the others. Sarah's family's old claim, he explained as they dismounted. Played out years ago, but they keep the main cabin habitable for hunting trips. The cabin was simple but solid, one room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a platform bed built into one corner. Kyle quickly checked the perimeter while Amanda unpacked Sarah's provisions. No sign of pursuit yet, he reported, returning to the cabin, but they'll figure out where we went soon enough. Need to think of our next move. Amanda sank onto one of the chairs, suddenly overwhelmed. I'm so tired of running, she whispered. Tired of putting others in danger because of my choices. Kyle knelt before her, his expression earnest. This isn't your fault, Amanda. You had every right to leave a man who hurt you. The only one to blame is Frank. She looked up, meeting his gaze. Why are you doing this, Kyle? Truly? You could have pointed me towards Silverdale and ridden on, but instead you're risking everything for someone you barely know. Kyle was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. My sister Catherine was 18 when she married James Blackwell. Charming man, everyone said, good provider. 6 months in, he broke her arm when dinner wasn't ready on time. His hands clenched into fists at the memory. I was away, riding with a cattle drive. By the time I returned, it had gotten worse. She wanted to leave, but was afraid. I promised I'd help her, told her to wait until I'd made arrangements. He stood abruptly, moving to the window, his back to Amanda. I was too late. He beat her so badly she lost the baby she was carrying. She died 3 days later. His voice broke slightly. I tracked Blackwell down, but the law got to him first. Hanged for murder, left me with nothing but regrets and a promise I made to her grave that I'd never stand by again if I could help. Amanda rose, crossing the room to stand beside him. Tentatively, she placed her hand on his arm. I'm so sorry, Kyle. He turned to her, pain and something else, something warmer in his eyes. When I saw you running, saw those bruises, it was like being given a second chance to do what I couldn't do for Catherine. And now, Amanda asked softly, is that all this is? Keeping a promise to a ghost? Kyle's gaze held her steadily. It started that way, he admitted. But now? He hesitated, then reached up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. Now it's about you, Amanda, your courage, your strength. The way you refuse to let fear define you. The tenderness in his touch, in his words, made Amanda's heart race. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to, she realized with surprise. But Kyle stepped back, his hand dropping to his side. We should conserve our supplies, he said, his voice returning to its usual practical tone. No telling how long we might need to stay here. The moment passed, but something had changed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was quite ready to name. Amanda busied herself organizing their meager provisions while Kyle tended to Paladin, each lost in their own thoughts. As evening approached, Kyle built a small fire in the fireplace, keeping it low to minimize smoke. They shared a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and dried apples from Sarah's bundle, sitting close together for warmth as the mountain air grew chill. "What was she like?" Amanda asked suddenly. "Your sister." A small smile touched Kyle's lips, the first real smile Amanda had seen from him. "Catherine was stubborn as a mule, brightest person I knew, could read anything she got her hands on, remembered every word, wanted to be a teacher someday." His expression softened with memory. Had a laugh that could light up a room, always saw the good in people even when they didn't deserve it. "She sounds wonderful," Amanda said gently. "She was," Kyle agreed. "You would have liked her, she would have definitely liked you." They fell silent, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees and rattling the cabin's shutters. "Storm coming," Kyle observed, rising to add another log to the fire. "Might work in our favor, cover our tracks." Amanda wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite the fire's warmth. "If they find us here, we're trapped." Kyle's expression was resolute. "They won't take you back, Amanda. Not while I'm breathing." The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have frightened her, given her history with violent men. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in years. Kyle's anger wasn't possessive or controlling, it was directed at those who would harm her, never at her. "What happens after?" she asked quietly. "If we get through this, I mean, where do we go from here?" Kyle regarded her thoughtfully, still thinking Whitefish might be best. "Or maybe farther. Montana's a big territory, plenty of places a person could start fresh." "And you," Amanda pressed, "would you stay, or is this just another stop on your travels?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Kyle was silent for so long that Amanda thought he might not answer. "I've spent 5 years running from memories," he finally said, his voice low. "Told myself I was free, but truth is I was just afraid to care about anyone or anything enough to lose it again." He met her gaze directly. "Meeting you, it's made me wonder if maybe it's time to stop running." Amanda's heart quickened at his words. "I'm afraid too," she admitted. "Afraid that Frank will find us, afraid that I'll never truly be free of him, afraid of raising this child alone." Kyle crossed the small space between them, kneeling before her chair. "You won't be alone, Amanda, not unless you want to be." He took her hand in his, a gesture at once respectful and intimate. "I know it's too soon, you've barely had time to breathe free air. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be there. For you and the child, however you need me to be." Tears welled in Amanda's eyes at the simple sincerity of his offer. In Kyle's steady gaze, she saw no demands, no expectations, only a promise freely given. Before she could respond, a sound outside made them both freeze. Hoofbeats approaching slowly. Kyle was on his feet in an instant, revolver drawn. "Stay low," he whispered, moving to the window and carefully peering through a gap in the shutters. His shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's Sarah." He opened the cabin door to reveal Sarah Parker, dismounting stiffly from an elderly mule. Her shotgun was strapped across her back, and her expression was grimmer than usual. "They're gone for now," she reported as Kyle helped her inside. "Headed north after I convinced them you'd fled toward the Canadian border." A satisfied smile crossed her face. "Amazing what men will believe from a harmless old widow." "Are you all right?" Amanda asked anxiously. "We heard a shot, just encouraging them to mind their manners in my store," Sarah said with a dismissive wave. "Fired over their heads, though I was tempted to aim lower when their leader started making threats." Kyle's expression darkened. "Frank," Sarah nodded, "charming fellow. Claimed his wife was confused and unwell, said anyone harboring her would face consequences." She snorted derisively. "Told him the only confused person I saw was him, thinking threats would work on me." Amanda shuddered, imagining Frank's rage at such defiance. "He'll be back." "Not immediately," Sarah said, settling into a chair by the fire. "Convinced him you'd had at least a day's head start north. With luck, they'll waste time searching in the wrong direction." She fixed them both with a stern look. "But you can't stay here. It's too obvious a hiding place if they return to Eagle's Rest." Kyle nodded in agreement. "We'll leave at first light, cut west through the high country, then swing north to Whitefish once we're clear." Sarah considered this. "Might be better to go south, actually, to Helena." "The territorial capital?" Amanda asked, surprised. "Wouldn't that be more dangerous, more people who might recognize me?" More people means it's easier to disappear, Sarah countered, and more law to protect you. My nephew Thomas is a lawyer there, specializes in cases like yours. Kyle looked intrigued. Divorce cases, Sarah nodded. Among other things, new territory means new laws. Women have more rights here than back east. Thomas could help make sure Frank has no legal claim to you or the child. Hope flickered in Amanda's eyes. Is that possible? With the right evidence and the right lawyer, yes, Sarah affirmed. Abuse is grounds for divorce in Montana territory, and Thomas is very good at what he does. Kyle and Amanda exchanged glances, silently weighing this new option. Finally, Kyle spoke. Helena's at least a week's ride from here through some rough country. But if it means Amanda could be truly free, legally as well as practically, it would be worth it, Amanda finished for him, her decision made. I want my child to have a clean start, no shadows hanging over us. Sarah nodded approvingly. I'll write Thomas a letter for you to carry. He'll help you get settled, find work and lodging. She eyed Kyle speculatively. Helena's growing fast, plenty of opportunity for a man with your skills if you were of a mind to put down roots. Kyle's gaze shifted to Amanda, something warm and hopeful in his blue eyes. I might be persuaded, he said softly. Sarah looked between them, a knowing smile touching her lips. Well then, let's get you two prepared for the journey. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night. Sarah had returned to Eagle's Rest under cover of darkness, coming back at dawn with additional supplies, food, ammunition, warmer clothing, and a second horse, a sturdy bay gelding. Joseph's old horse, she explained as Kyle examined the animal appreciatively. Been eating my hay all winter, time he earned his keep. With 2 horses, they could travel faster and more comfortably. Kyle helped Amanda mount the bay, which Sarah assured them was gentle and sure-footed. His name's Ranger, Sarah said, patting the horse's neck. Carried Joseph through the mountains for 15 years without a misstep. As they prepared to depart, Sarah pressed a sealed letter into Amanda's hand. For Thomas. And this, she added, passing over a small buckskin pouch that clinked with coins, is for emergencies. Don't argue, she said firmly when Amanda began to protest. Consider it an advance on what you'll earn working for Thomas. He always needs help in his office. Amanda blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the woman's generosity. How can I ever thank you? Sarah's weathered face softened. Live well, be happy, that's thanks enough. She turned to Kyle. You take care of her, Kyle Irwin, and yourself too, for once. Kyle nodded, his expression solemn. You have my word. With final goodbyes, they set off, following a narrow trail that wound south through dense pine forest. Sarah's directions would take them through rarely traveled back country, avoiding main routes where Frank and his men might be watching. For 3 days, they rode without incident, making good time across the rugged landscape. The additional horse made all the difference. They could alternate mounts, keeping both animals fresh, and camp more comfortably knowing they had a backup if one horse went lame. Amanda found herself growing stronger daily, both physically and emotionally. Away from Frank's oppressive presence, her natural resilience reasserted itself. She began to imagine a real future, with choices and possibilities, and increasingly those imaginings included Kyle. The more time they spent together, the more she appreciated his quiet strength, his unwavering respect for her autonomy, his dry humor that emerged in unexpected moments. She caught him watching her sometimes, a warmth in his eyes that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. On the evening of the 4th day, they made camp in a protected hollow near a small stream. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. After they had eaten and tended the horses, they sat side by side near the small fire, comfortable in each other's presence. Tell me about Helena, Amanda said, breaking the companionable silence. Have you been there before? Kyle nodded, adding a small stick to the fire. A few times. It's growing fast since they discovered gold in Last Chance Gulch, not as rough as some mining towns, though. Has proper buildings, businesses, even a school. Amanda smiled at that last detail. A school would be good for the baby eventually. Kyle's expression softened as he glanced at her midsection, still barely showing beneath her dress. Boy or girl, what do you think? Amanda placed a hand protectively over her stomach. I'm not sure, sometimes I think a girl, other times. She hesitated. I worry about having a boy, about him growing up to be like Frank. That wouldn't happen, Kyle said with quiet conviction. Not with you as his mother. The simple faith in his words warmed her more than the fire. And perhaps with you as a friend, she ventured, suddenly shy. Kyle turned to face her fully, his expression serious. I'd like to be more than that, Amanda, if you'll have me. He took her hand gently in his. I know it's soon. Know you've barely had time to breathe free air, but these past days with you, they've meant something to me, something I thought I'd never feel again. Amanda's heart pounded in her chest, hope and fear mingling in equal measure. Kyle, I care for you too. More than I thought possible after everything with Frank, but I'm afraid of making another mistake, afraid of trusting my judgment. Kyle nodded, understanding in his eyes. You don't have to decide anything now or ever if that's what you want. I'm not going anywhere, Amanda. Whatever you need, friend, protector, or something more, I'll be that. The sincerity in his voice, the patience in his offer, brought tears to Amanda's eyes. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his a gentle, questioning kiss. Kyle remained perfectly still for a heartbeat, then returned the kiss with equal gentleness. His hand coming up to cup her cheek with exquisite care when they parted, Amanda saw her own wonder reflected in Kyle's eyes. I didn't plan to do that, she admitted, a small smile playing at her lips. I'm glad you did, he replied simply. They might have kissed again, but a sound in the distance made them both stiffen hoofbeats, multiple horses moving at speed. Kyle was on his feet instantly, dousing the fire with dirt. Could be nothing, he said, though his hand moved to his revolver. But let's not take chances. They quickly gathered their essentials, saddling the horses with practiced efficiency. The sounds grew louder, definitely riders coming from the north, following their trail. Frank, Amanda whispered, fear constricting her throat. Kyle helped her mount Ranger, his expression grim but determined. We've got a good lead. Know the terrain better than they do, we'll outride them. They set off at a gallop, guided by starlight along the narrow trail. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew more distinct, shouts now audible among the hoofbeats. Amanda bent low over Ranger's neck, urging the steady horse to greater speed. Beside her, Kyle rode Paladin with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. For hours, they raced through the darkness, taking game trails and shortcuts that Sarah had marked on a rough map. The sounds of pursuit faded, then returned, never quite disappearing but never drawing close enough to be an immediate threat. Dawn was breaking when they crested a ridge and saw a sight that made Amanda's heart sink. The trail ahead dropped steeply into a narrow canyon, with sheer walls rising on either side. A perfect place for an ambush. Kyle reined in Paladin, surveying the terrain with a practiced eye. Don't like it, he muttered. Too confined, no way out except forward or back. Amanda glanced behind them. The sounds of pursuit had faded again, but for how long? What choice do we have? Kyle studied the ridge line, then pointed west. There, that game trail. Might be rough going, but it could take us around the canyon. Emerge further south, closer to Helena. The trail he indicated was barely visible, a thin line winding among rocks and scrub pine along the ridge. It looked precarious at best, dangerous at worst. But the alternative, the canyon below, with its perfect ambush points, was worse. Let's try it, Amanda agreed. The game trail proved every bit as treacherous as it appeared. In places, it narrowed to barely the width of a horse with a sheer drop to one side. They dismounted, leading the horses through the worst sections, each step taken with careful deliberation. By midday, they had made it halfway around the canyon rim. The sounds of pursuit had faded completely, suggesting Frank and his men had either lost their trail or chosen the canyon route instead. They paused to rest the horses and eat a small meal of jerky and hardtack. Amanda's back ached from tension and exertion, but she said nothing, not wanting to slow their progress. You're doing well, Kyle said, noticing her discomfort despite her silence. Most experienced riders would balk at this trail. Amanda managed a smile. Not much choice is there. There's always a choice, Kyle replied seriously. You could have stayed with Frank, chosen the familiar pain over the unknown, but you didn't. That takes a special kind of courage. His words gave her strength. When they resumed their journey, Amanda rode with renewed determination, her focus on the future waiting beyond these mountains. They made it around the canyon by nightfall, emerging onto a broader trail that wound south through gentler terrain. No sign of pursuit, but Kyle remained vigilant, choosing their campsite carefully, a small clearing hidden among large boulders, providing both shelter and defensible position. As they prepared a cold camp, foregoing a fire despite the chill, Amanda noticed Kyle checking and rechecking his revolver, his expression troubled. "What is it?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the evening cold. Kyle looked up, hesitating before answering. "Been thinking about what happens when we reach Helena. If Sarah's nephew can help with the divorce, that's good. But legal proceedings take time. Frank won't give up just because papers are filed." Amanda nodded, the reality of their situation never far from her mind. "You think he'll come after me in Helena?" "I think a man like that doesn't stop until he's forced to," Kyle said grimly. "And I don't want you looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life, Amanda. You deserve better. Your child deserves better." "What are you suggesting?" Amanda asked, though something in his tone made her suspect she already knew. Kyle met her gaze directly. "I'm suggesting we end this, permanently." A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air ran through Amanda. "You mean kill him?" It wasn't a question, but Kyle nodded anyway. "There are places between here and Helena where a man could disappear. Accidents happen in these mountains all the time." Amanda was silent for a long moment, weighing his words against her own conscience. Finally, she shook her head. "No, Kyle, not like that." Surprise flickered across his face. "Amanda, he won't stop. You said it yourself, he'll kill you for leaving." "And I believe that's true," she acknowledged. "But if you kill him, even in some remote place where no one would know, we would know. It would follow us, shadow everything we might build together." She reached for his hand. "I don't want that for us or for my child." Kyle's fingers tightened around hers. "Then what? I won't let him hurt you again, Amanda. I can't." "We'll use the law," Amanda said with newfound conviction. "Sarah said women have rights in Montana territory. If her nephew is as good as she claims, we'll use those rights. File for divorce, get a restraining order if such things exist here." A small, determined smile curved her lips. "And if Frank ignores the law, then he'll be the one in the wrong." Defending oneself against a man breaking the law is different from ambushing him on a mountain trail. Kyle studied her face, something like admiration kindling in his eyes. "You're a remarkable woman, Amanda Garrett. I'm learning to be," she replied softly. "With your help." They reached Helena 3 days later, descending from the mountains into the bustling territorial capital, just as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the growing city. Amanda looked with wonder at the mix of substantial stone buildings and hasty wooden structures, at the diverse crowd thronging the streets, miners in rough clothes, businessmen in suits, women in fashionable dresses alongside others in practical frontier attire. Kyle guided them through the busy streets to a modest hotel on a quiet side street. "Wait here," he said, helping Amanda dismount. "I'll get us rooms, then we can find Sarah's nephew." Amanda nodded, staying with the horses while Kyle entered the hotel. She felt conspicuous standing there, certain that any moment Frank would appear from the crowd. But the busy residents of Helena passed without a second glance, each absorbed in their own concerns. Kyle returned with keys to 2 adjoining rooms. "Told them my sister and I just arrived from back east," he explained as they stabled the horses. "Figured that would cause less talk than the truth for now." The hotel was simple but clean, the rooms small but private, a luxury Amanda hadn't expected. After weeks on the trail, the prospect of a real bed and bath seemed almost unbelievable. "Rest," Kyle advised, pausing at her door. "I'll find Thomas Parker, bring him here if he's willing." Amanda caught his hand before he could leave. "Be careful, Kyle, Frank could be anywhere." His expression softened. "I will be. Lock the door behind me, don't open it for anyone but me." After he left, Amanda bolted the door as instructed, then sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. They had made it to Helena. They had escaped Frank for now. But what came next remained uncertain. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the slight swell that would soon be impossible to hide. "We're going to be all right," she whispered, as much to reassure herself as the child growing within her. "We're going to be free." Kyle returned 2 hours later, accompanied by a tall, lean man with Sarah's shrewd eyes and a serious expression. Amanda opened the door at Kyle's familiar knock, relief flooding through her at his safe return. "Amanda, this is Thomas Parker," Kyle introduced them. "Sarah's nephew and the best lawyer in Helena, according to everyone I asked." Thomas inclined his head politely, though his expression remained reserved. "Mrs. Garrett, my aunt's letter explained some of your circumstances, but I'll need to hear the full account from you directly." Amanda nodded, gesturing for them to sit. Over the next hour, she told her story: her marriage to Frank, the years of abuse, her flight, and their journey to Helena. Thomas listened attentively, occasionally asking precise questions but offering no judgment or commentary. When she finished, the lawyer was silent for a moment, organizing his thoughts. "Montana Territory's laws regarding divorce are more progressive than most," he finally said. "Cruelty and violence are clear grounds. The child complicates matters legally but strengthens your case morally." "Can you help her?" Kyle asked directly. Thomas nodded. "I can file the divorce petition immediately. Judge Wilson is fair-minded, unlikely to favor a husband simply for being a husband." He turned to Amanda. "But I must warn you, this process is not immediate. And while it proceeds, you have no legal protection against your husband should he find you." "What about a restraining order?" Amanda asked, remembering the term from somewhere. Thomas looked surprised at her knowledge. "Possible, but rare in these cases." "I can request one, argue that your condition makes the danger more acute." He glanced at Kyle. "Having witnesses to the abuse would strengthen the case considerably." "I saw bruises," Kyle said grimly, and her fear when she spoke of him was genuine. "Sarah, too," Amanda added. "She saw him threaten me, saw how he spoke about me." Thomas made notes in a small leather book. "Good, I'll take sworn statements from both of you. Sarah can send hers by mail." He looked up, his expression serious. "But you should understand, pieces of paper don't stop bullets or fists. Legal proceedings will give you freedom eventually, Mrs. Garrett, but they may not provide immediate safety." "That's my concern," Kyle interjected. Thomas studied him thoughtfully. "And your interest in this case, Mr. Irwin, beyond being a good Samaritan." Kyle glanced at Amanda, something passing between them that needed no words. "I care about what happens to Amanda and her child," he said simply. "I want them safe, with or without legal papers saying they should be." Thomas's expression softened slightly. "I see." He turned back to Amanda. "Where will you stay while this proceeds? Helena is a small city in many ways. Word travels." "I hadn't thought that far ahead," Amanda admitted. "Is there work to be had for a woman in my circumstances?" "As it happens," Thomas said, "I recently lost my secretary to matrimony. The position requires literacy, discretion, and organizational skills. The pay is modest but fair and includes lodging in the rooms above my office." He glanced between them. "Respectable lodging, I should add. My aunt would accept nothing less." Relief washed over Amanda. "I can read and write well. My father insisted on education for both his daughters." "Good. As for you, Mr. Irwin," Thomas continued, turning to Kyle, "I understand from my aunt that you're handy with repairs and construction. Helena is growing rapidly. Skilled labor is always in demand." Kyle nodded thoughtfully. "I can turn my hand to most trades. Built barns, repaired mills, worked cattle. Then you'll find no shortage of work," Thomas assured him. "Now, I suggest you both rest tonight. Tomorrow, we'll begin the legal proceedings and get you settled in more permanent accommodations." After Thomas left, Amanda and Kyle sat in comfortable silence for a moment, processing all that had transpired. "Do you think it will work?" Amanda finally asked. "This legal approach?" Kyle considered her question seriously. "Thomas seems competent. If the laws here are as he describes, you have a solid case." He leaned forward, taking her hands in his. "But Amanda, what happens if Frank finds you before the divorce is finalized? Papers won't protect you then." "I know," she acknowledged. "But I meant what I said in the mountains. I don't want to build our future on violence if we can avoid it." Kyle's eyes widened slightly at her words. "Our future?" A blush colored Amanda's cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "If you still want that." "If you meant what you said about staying," Kyle's expression softened into a warmth that made her heart race. I meant it, every word. He brushed a gentle thumb across her knuckles. But I need you to understand something, Amanda. If it comes down to a choice between killing Frank or watching him hurt you or worse, there's no choice at all for me. I'll do what's necessary to protect you and your child, even if it costs me your good opinion. The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have frightened her, given her history. Instead, it filled her with a sense of security she'd thought forever lost. Let's pray it doesn't come to that, she said softly. But if it does, I understand, Kyle, I do. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Thomas filed the divorce petition immediately, requesting an expedited hearing due to Amanda's condition and the documented abuse. Judge Wilson, a stern but fair-minded man, set a date for initial proceedings just 2 weeks hence. Amanda settled into her role as Thomas's secretary with surprising ease. The work was demanding but satisfying, requiring both intelligence and attention to detail. The small apartment above the law office became a sanctuary of sorts, her first truly private space since before her marriage. Kyle found work with a construction crew building a new bank on Main Street. His skills and work ethic quickly earned him the foreman's respect, and soon he was being offered more jobs than he could accept. He took lodgings at a boarding house 2 streets from Thomas's office, close enough to respond quickly if needed but maintaining propriety for Amanda's reputation. They saw each other daily, usually sharing a simple dinner in Amanda's small parlor, sometimes walking through the more respectable parts of town in the early evening. To casual observers, they appeared to be nothing more than good friends, perhaps distant relatives. But in private moments, the connection between them deepened, built on mutual respect and growing affection. Amanda found herself laughing more, standing straighter, speaking her mind without fear of reprisal. The bruises on her body faded, and with them, some of the deeper wounds to her spirit began to heal as well. Her pregnancy progressed, her condition becoming more visible with each passing week. Far from being scandalized, the women of Helena, many of whom had faced their own hardships on the frontier, responded with practical support and advice. For his part, Kyle discovered what it meant to have purpose beyond mere survival. Watching Amanda blossom into her true self gave him a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd known since before the war. He found himself making plans, thinking beyond the next season or the next job. He began setting aside a portion of his earnings, initially for Amanda and the child, but increasingly for a shared future he dared to imagine. Yet beneath this growing contentment lay a constant vigilance. Kyle never went anywhere unarmed. He made discreet inquiries at stagecoach offices and livery stables, wanting to know if anyone matching Frank's description had arrived in town. Thomas kept his ear to the ground for legal notices or inquiries from other territories. Amanda jumped at unexpected sounds, her eyes darting to windows and doors when she thought no one was watching. The day of the initial hearing arrived with a sense of both hope and dread. Amanda dressed carefully in a modest navy dress that Thomas's sister had altered to accommodate her growing midsection. Kyle escorted her to the courthouse, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. Judge Wilson conducted the proceedings with brisk efficiency. Frank, predictably, had not responded to the legal notices Thomas had published in newspapers across the territory. In his absence, the judge reviewed Amanda's sworn statement, as well as corroborating testimonies from Kyle and a letter from Sarah. The court finds sufficient grounds to proceed with dissolution of marriage, Judge Wilson declared, his voice carrying through the small courtroom. Final hearing set for 1 month hence. If respondent fails to appear, judgment will be entered in petitioner's favor. Thomas looked pleased as they left the courthouse. A good start, he told Amanda. Judge Wilson is clearly sympathetic to your case. Amanda nodded, relief evident in her expression, but Kyle remained tense, his eyes scanning the street as they walked back to Thomas's office. 1 month, he said once they were safely inside. A lot can happen in a month. Thomas didn't disagree. I've requested the judge seal the court records, citing concerns for Mrs. Garrett's safety. He's agreed, which means the details of these proceedings won't be public knowledge. But Helena is still a small city in many ways. Word travels. Kyle's jaw tightened. I'll increase my visits, perhaps stay closer to Amanda's lodgings. That would cause talk of a different kind, Thomas pointed out diplomatically, which might not serve Mrs. Garrett's case. Amanda, who had been quiet until now, spoke up decisively. I won't live in fear, hiding away. We've come this far by facing things directly. We'll continue that way. She placed a hand on her rounded belly. Besides, this little one gives me courage I never knew I had. Kyle's expression softened as he looked at her. You've always had courage, Amanda, from the moment I first saw you running through those woods. That evening, they took their usual walk through the small park near the courthouse. The summer air was warm, fragrant with the scent of wildflowers that grew along the park's perimeter. Amanda walked with her hand tucked into the crook of Kyle's arm, a proper but affectionate gesture that had become their custom. Thomas thinks the divorce will be granted at the final hearing, Amanda said as they followed the gravel path. If Frank doesn't appear to contest it, Kyle nodded, though his expression remained cautious. And if he does appear, Amanda's step faltered slightly. Then we face him. With the law on our side this time, Kyle covered her hand with his, giving it a gentle squeeze. Together, they completed their circuit of the park and turned toward Amanda's lodgings. The street was quiet, most businesses closed for the day, only the saloons and hotels showing lights in their windows. As they approached Thomas's office, Kyle suddenly stiffened, his hand moving imperceptibly closer to his revolver. Amanda, he said quietly, go back to the park, now. Amanda followed his gaze and felt ice flood her veins. Frank Garrett stood on the boardwalk outside Thomas's office, his massive frame unmistakable even in the gathering dusk. He hadn't seen them yet, his attention focused on the building's entrance. Go, Kyle repeated, his voice urgent but controlled. Find Thomas or Sheriff Davis, tell them what's happening. Amanda's hand tightened on his arm. I won't leave you to face him alone. Amanda, Kyle's voice was gentle but firm, think of the baby, please, I'll be fine. The reminder of her child's vulnerability decided her. With a last, anguished look at Kyle, Amanda turned and hurried back toward the park, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. Kyle watched until she was safely out of sight, then approached Frank with measured steps, making no attempt at stealth. Let the man know he was coming. Let him prepare. This would be fair, at least. Garrett, he called when he was still 20 paces away. Frank turned, his face contorting with rage when he recognized Kyle. You, he spat. Should have known you'd still be sniffing around what's mine. Kyle stopped at a careful distance, his posture relaxed but alert. Amanda isn't property, Garrett. She's a free woman making her own choices. Frank took a menacing step forward. That whore belongs to me, the law says so. Till death do us part, those were the vows. The law in Montana territory says differently, Kyle replied evenly. Judge Wilson's already heard the case. Divorce is all but granted. Fury twisted Frank's features. No piece of paper changes what's mine. Where is she? Where's my wife? Safe, Kyle said simply. Beyond your reach. Frank's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. We'll see about that. Once you're out of the way, she'll come crawling back, always does. Kyle made no move toward his own weapon. Not this time, Garrett. Amanda's stronger than you ever gave her credit for. She's built a life here. People respect her, value her. She doesn't need a man who uses his fists instead of words. And I suppose you think she needs you, Frank sneered, playing the noble protector. What's your stake in this, cowboy? Getting my leavings when I'm gone. Kyle's expression hardened at the crude implication, but his voice remained steady. My stake is seeing a good woman and her child safe from a man who doesn't deserve them. Her child. Frank's eyes widened with sudden understanding. She's carrying my son, a child who will never know your cruelty, Kyle replied, who will be raised with love instead of fear. Something dangerous flashed in Frank's eyes. That's my blood, my heir. No court in this territory will keep a man from his own flesh and blood. Courts across the country are doing exactly that, Kyle countered. When that man has proven himself unfit to be a father, Frank's hand closed around the grip of his revolver. I've heard enough from you, step aside. I'm taking what's mine. Kyle remained where he stood, directly between Frank and the entrance to Thomas's office. "That's not going to happen, Garrett." For a tense moment, they stared at each other, the air between them charged with the certainty of violence to come. Then Frank drew his gun in a quick, practiced motion, but Kyle was faster. His revolver cleared leather in a blur, and 2 shots rang out in rapid succession. Frank staggered backward, a look of surprise crossing his face as 2 red stains blossomed on his chest. His gun fired uselessly into the dirt as he fell, his massive body hitting the boardwalk with a heavy thud. Kyle approached cautiously, keeping his weapon trained on Frank until he was certain the man was no longer a threat. He knelt briefly, checking for signs of life, but the stillness told him what he needed to know. Frank Garrett was dead. The sound of running footsteps made Kyle stand and turn, his gun still in hand but pointed safely downward. Sheriff Davis rounded the corner at a sprint, his deputy close behind. Behind them came Thomas Parker, and to Kyle's dismay, Amanda. "What happened here?" the sheriff demanded, taking in the scene with a professional eye. "Frank Garrett," Kyle explained, holstering his weapon slowly so as not to alarm the lawman. "Amanda's husband. He was waiting for her, threatened to take her by force, drew on me when I stood in his way." The sheriff looked to his deputy, who had knelt to examine Frank's body. "2 shots, center mass," the younger man reported. "His gun's been fired once into the ground, looks like." Sheriff Davis nodded, then turned back to Kyle. "Anyone else see what happened?" Before Kyle could answer, a voice called from across the street. "I did, Sheriff." A middle-aged man in a shopkeeper's apron stepped forward, "Was closing up the hardware store when I heard raised voices. Saw the whole thing. Big fellow drew first, clear as day. This man," he nodded toward Kyle, "gave him every chance to walk away." Other witnesses emerged from nearby buildings, a young couple who'd been walking a block away, the barber who'd been sweeping his shop's porch, a hotel clerk who'd stepped out for a breath of air. Each corroborated Kyle's account. Frank had drawn first, had made explicit threats, had given Kyle no choice but to defend himself. Amanda pushed through the gathering crowd to Kyle's side, her face pale but composed. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her eyes searching his for injuries. Kyle shook his head. "I'm fine." The sheriff, after taking statements from the witnesses, approached them with a grim expression. "Looks like clear-cut self-defense from what everyone's saying. Still, there'll need to be an inquest, standard procedure when there's a killing, justified or not." He glanced at Amanda, something like sympathy in his weathered face. "Sorry about your husband, madam." "Ex-husband," Thomas corrected firmly, joining them. "Or as good as, given the court proceedings already in motion." Sheriff Davis nodded. "Either way, we'll need statements from both of you. And Mr. Irwin, I'll have to hold your weapon as evidence until the inquest is complete." Kyle handed over his revolver without protest. The sheriff accepted it carefully, then addressed the growing crowd of onlookers. "Nothing more to see here, folks. Go on about your business." As the crowd dispersed, and Frank's body was removed by the undertaker, Amanda stood close to Kyle, her hand finding his in a gesture that spoke volumes. Thomas noticed but made no comment, his practical mind already working on the legal implications of the evening's events. "The inquest will be straightforward with so many witnesses," he assured them as they walked back to his office. Kyle acted in self-defense, protecting not only himself but you as well, Amanda. No jury in the territory would find fault with that. Amanda nodded mechanically, still processing the reality that Frank was gone, truly gone, not simply absent or searching for her, but gone forever. The knowledge brought a complex mixture of relief, grief for what might have been in a different life, and uncertainty about what came next. That night, propriety was set aside. Kyle refused to leave Amanda alone in her lodgings, and Thomas, understanding the emotional toll of the day's events, made no objection to him staying on the small sofa in her parlor. Neither Amanda nor Kyle slept much, talking quietly through the night about everything and nothing, memories from their childhoods, hopes for the future, fears they'd never voiced aloud before. "I never wanted to kill him," Kyle admitted in the small hours of the morning, his voice low in the darkness. "Despite everything he'd done, I hoped it wouldn't come to that." Amanda, curled in an armchair opposite him, reached out to touch his hand. You gave him every chance to walk away. Every witness saw that. I know, Kyle acknowledged. But taking a life, it changes a man, even when there's no choice. Amanda was quiet for a moment, considering his words. Will it change how you feel about us, about the future we talked about? Kyle squeezed her hand gently. No. If anything, it makes me more certain. Life's too precious, too fragile to waste on regrets or what-ifs. He leaned forward, his expression earnest in the dim light. I love you, Amanda, have for a while now, probably since that first day if I'm honest with myself. The simple declaration, spoken so plainly, brought tears to Amanda's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. So much it frightens me sometimes. No more fear, Kyle promised softly. Not of Frank, not of the future, just us together building something good. The inquest, held 3 days later, was as straightforward as Thomas had predicted. Witness after witness testified to Frank's threatening behavior, his first draw, Kyle's repeated attempts to defuse the situation. The jury deliberated for less than 10 minutes before returning a verdict of justified homicide. With Frank's death, the divorce proceedings became moot. Instead, Thomas filed papers establishing Amanda's legal status as a widow, ensuring her full rights to make decisions for herself and her unborn child. What now? Amanda asked Kyle as they left the courthouse after the inquest, the weight of uncertainty lifted from their shoulders at last. Kyle took her hand, no longer concerned with appearances or propriety. That depends on you. I meant what I said the other night. I love you, Amanda. Want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Amanda smiled, a full, radiant smile that transformed her face. I will, gladly. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony in Thomas's parlor, with Sarah Parker making the journey from Eagles Rest to stand as Amanda's witness. The older woman embraced them both afterward, satisfaction evident in her shrewd eyes. Knew you two were meant for each other the moment you rode into my store, she declared. Some things an old woman just knows. Kyle and Amanda purchased a small house on the outskirts of Helena with the money they had saved, plus a generous wedding gift from Thomas, who had come to regard them both as family. The property included enough land for a vegetable garden, a few chickens, and Paladin and Ranger, who now grazed contentedly in a paddock beside the house. 3 months after their wedding, Amanda gave birth to a daughter, a tiny, perfect girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. They named her Catherine, after Kyle's sister, with Sarah as her middle name in honor of the woman who had helped make their happiness possible. As Kyle held his daughter for the first time, looking down into her small, serious face, he felt the last shadows of his past finally lift. This was what he had been searching for in all those years of drifting, not an escape from memories, but a reason to make new ones. She's perfect, he whispered, gently touching Catherine's tiny hand. Just like her mother, Amanda, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at him from the bed. She's both of us, the best parts, I think. Kyle carefully placed the baby in Amanda's arms, then sat beside them, his family complete at last. Outside, the Montana sun painted the distant mountains gold, promising a new day in a life finally free from fear. Remember what you said to me that first day? Amanda asked softly, gazing down at their daughter. When I told you Frank would kill me for leaving, Kyle nodded, his throat tight with emotion. I said he'd face a better shot first. Amanda looked up, meeting his gaze with eyes full of love. You kept your word in every possible way. And I always will, Kyle promised, bending to kiss her gently, for as long as we both shall live.